Good morning. Muy buenos dias. I'm Charles Glazer, the United States Ambassador to El Salvador and a member of the Woodrow Wilson Center Board of Trustees. It's my pleasure today to welcome you to the Directors Forum with His Excellency Elias Antonio Saca Gonzalez, mi buen amigo, the President of the Republic of El Salvador. Established by an act of Congress in 1968, the Wilson Center is our nation's official living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. It was founded to honor and build upon his legacy of a man who bridged the divide between scholarship and public policy. The center brings together the thinkers and the doers, policymakers, scholars, and business leaders, in the hope and the belief that a frank and open dialogue will lead to better understanding, cooperation, and public policy. The Wilson Center's Latin America program has held conferences on El Salvador, in San Salvador, and in Washington as part of its project on comparative peace processes in Latin America. Together, the Wilson Center on the Hill program, the Latin America program, is collaborating and sponsoring an upcoming trip of members of the U.S. Congress to El Salvador and to Guatemala. It is with great pleasure that I host this event today with my friend President Saca. El Salvador is one of our closest allies in the region, being the only country in the Western Hemisphere to have troops in Iraq serving side by side with us fighting the global war on terror. President Saca was elected to the presidency in 2004. Prior to becoming president, he was a broadcast journalist and businessman. We're very fortunate and honored to have President Saca with us today to discuss peace and prosperity in Central America. Following his remarks, President Saca has agreed to take questions. It's a great honor to introduce President Saca.
Good morning to all of you. Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador and my delegation, members of our embassies to the White House and the OAS, the Salvadorian consular staff, Your Excellency, Ambassador of the United States of America in El Salvador, our dear friend Charles Glazer, President of the Wilson Institute, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ambassador, for your kind words. When one has a friend, they always say nice things about you. So thank you so much. Very kind of you. First of all, I would like this morning to tell you that I appreciate the invitation of the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, an institution whose name that was named after the 20th President of the United States of America, a man that loved peace but paradoxically had to face the First World War. As it is logical, well, just last week in San Salvador, we celebrated the Ibero-American Presidential Summit, and we had 5 or 6 themes that we were going to talk about. But logically, the economic issue was the theme that prevailed throughout the summit, where we had 19 heads of state of all America, and the President of Spain and the Prime Minister of Portugal. I'm going to just relate what has happened in Central America in the last 20 years. And of course, I'm going to talk about the economic issues as well. Surely, some will coincide with my point of view, some might not. And this is what democracy is all about, to discuss ideas. President Wilson was a high-level professor. He was a promoter of the democratization of education and social justice, as well as of the Society of Nations, which was the institution that came before the Organization of the United Nations that established international cooperation, arbitration of conflicts, and collective security as their main pillars. This contributed for him to gain the Peace Nobel Prize in 1920. This is why it is so important what we're going to say today, that is called Building Peace and Prosperity in Central America. Allow me to remind you all where we come from and to review what we have progressed and conclude with the challenges that we face that today are even greater due to the world economic crisis that we are living. The economic wealth that we had in Central America in the 60s and the 70s was not accompanied in the same way by progress in democracy and did not contribute to improve the social and economic conditions of the majority of our people. Within this context, the East-West conflict placed El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua in the scenario of the great strategies of the superpowers. In the case of Guatemala, Guatemala faced insurgent groups since the 60s. It saw new guerrilla organizations emerge in the 70s and 72. The conflict was not of great intensity, but it did limit the social and economic progress and caused thousands of casualties until December 1996, when the peace accords were signed, ending 36 years of violence in our neighboring country. In Nicaragua, after a brief but strong clash, a very strong one, the Sandinista Liberación Nacional Front, supported economically and militarily by Cuba and the Soviet Union, defeated Anastasio Somoza in July 1979. The socialist experiment that nationalized the banks and the external trade of Nicaragua was not able to recover the economy, not even with the massive external aid, and brought the country to greater poverty, where the population supported inflations that were higher than 13,900% a year. Also, the clash between the Sandinistas and the Contras in the 80s damaged the national infrastructure and stopped the progress that they wanted to reach. The history of Nicaragua reiterates that state interventionism does not solve the problems. In the 90s, democracy generated a structural change that gave back some spaces to the private sector, reducing inflation below one digit and cutting the exterior debt in 50% and recovering the economic growth. In the case of my country, El Salvador, the social political internal tension worsened after the mid-70s, and at the end of that decade, we started with an armed conflict that divided the Salvadoran society, caused a great pain, and made the country go back more than 30 years. In this context, the economic situation worsened so much due to the uncertainty of the conflict, as well as by the destruction of our infrastructure, of the production sources, and the lack of respect for the life of persons. All this in the midst of a strong world economic recession. In this very adverse environment of the 80s, statism did not allow the private sector to be created and took as its own the main sources of production and services. The irresponsibility and populism destabilized the economy and caused a greater inflation in the history of El Salvador. The donations of the United States added to more than $1,700 million in the 80s, and the loans granted through the USAID added another $588 million that were not enough to stimulate the growth of the country. The reconstruction of our country cost $5 billion because the human cost can never be reconstructed. On the contrary, the country became even poorer. It was qualified as a high-risk country. There was capital flight, private investment withdrew, exports succumbed, and the financial system was technically in bankruptcy and in the hands of the state. In the 90s, the government started to clean its public finances, to liberalize its economy, and to open it to the external trade in an effort to give back the productive initiative to the private sector, which is the employment and wealth generator. Together, we implemented very profound social policies. This is how the economic progress started giving its first fruit. Besides, the political will of the government was determined to negotiate with the guerrilla and to sign the peace accords on January 16, 1992. The full compliance of these agreements allowed El Salvador to be recognized worldwide. The system of freedom started to mature in the 90s. Democracy became more robust, and all the political parties were incorporated without any restriction, and they are all represented in the legislature and the city halls. After the end of the war, the economy of the country stabilized and overcame the growth rates of the 80s. The ratio of the population under a state of poverty fell from 62% in 1988 to 31% in the year 2006, which has allowed El Salvador to be recognized worldwide and also has gained very high ratings thanks to this progress. El Salvador is also rated among the 20 countries that are the freest in the world, according to the Heritage Foundation. Unfortunately, some external factors that are not under our control, like the high prices of food and oil in the international market, caused greater inflation and an increase of poverty in the year 2007. As a result of the peace accords, El Salvador started a profound transformation to modernize its legal framework. This is how institutions such as the National Academy for Public Security, the National Civil Police, the National Council of the Judicature, the Judicial Training School, the Ombudsman's Office, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, and the Intelligence Organization of the State were born. We also approved a new criminal procedural and family codes, besides more than 50 new laws and reforms. And last week, we approved a new criminal procedural code. It has not arrived to my office yet to review it and to send observations or to sanction this new law. Today, our institutionality guarantees a high degree of legal security in all the environments of our management, especially for investors. Nevertheless, this job is a continuous one. We have to adjust ourselves to the demands of a world that is evolving very rapidly and that has changed after the crisis that we're going through now. It is evident that the achievement of peace in El Salvador and Guatemala, as well as the return of democracy in Nicaragua, were determinant at that moment for the economic progress, the social and political and institutional progress reached by our countries. It also facilitated a greater integration of the Central American region, including Costa Rica and Honduras. Besides, the free trade agreement with the United States, CAFTA, with Central America and the Dominican Republic, has been fundamental to expand and to diversify our exports, with which we reduce the vulnerability before the external crisis, becoming becoming in itself a factor for progress. Dear friends, Central America has done great part of its homework. Central America conquered peace and has made an effort to improve its economies and the living conditions of its people. Now, we need our democracies to achieve greater citizen participation in the formulation of public policies in the local governments and the central government. We also require greater transparencies in our public management with better social control mechanisms in order to have a state that is respected because it is respectable. Although the economic and social progress of the last 18 years has filled us with satisfaction, we also recognize that we're far from having the conditions that can ensure the prosperity of all our people. Before this reality, the great challenge is to learn to convert economic growth into development, to have some societies that are satisfied. It has to be an exhaustible source of resources to finance social progress until converting it into social development, because only then will we be able to generate prosperity that is an unavoidable condition to fulfill the desire of the human being, that is to enjoy progress in social peace. Nevertheless, these challenges that Central America faces have been worsened by the crisis of this financial crisis that strikes all the world and that logically will drag the actual economy and has started to deaccelerate our growth. This is a drama, gentlemen and ladies, because this is what I called the perfect storm even before it occurred, because it is translated into unemployment and the loss of purchase power and the capacity to progress as persons and families. We cannot ignore that people have lost their tranquility, their trust in the institutionality that sustains the free market and the operation of the financial system. All these have suffered the loss of trust in our great powers. And those that oppose themselves to the system of freedoms have even demonstrated that this crisis and capitalism and free market have reached their end. This really encloses a great danger, because populism and those against capitalism nurture themselves from the anguish of the people. And they say that they want to end with a system of freedoms. A system that privileges freedom cannot be condemned to extermination, because the creativeness of the human being is only possible in liberty. There is no limits to find solutions to the problems and new forms of progress. But we also have to take care that this ingeniousness and creativity is not used to put the free market system at the service of just a few in detriment of the great masses. This is why I stress we are talking about free market and not the free abuse of the market. We have to rescue the values that sustain the social corporate responsibility and strengthen the state institutions in charge of creating policies and instruments to supervise that market, so that the free and healthy competition prevails. This does not mean greater controls, but rather a greater quality in supervision. It does not mean that a state has to be involved in the productive functions that are proper of the private sector. It means that the state has to maintain a balance where the market is not so free so as to have the law of the jungle prevail, nor either controls that asphyxiate the creative initiative and competitive of the human being. And this is what we have been trying to do in El Salvador, so that the controls that we have do not asphyxiate the competition creativity of our human beings. If we are able to do this, then we will have recovered the prime function of the market, which is to generate employment and wealth to finance social progress, which is in turn an unavoidable condition to stimulate economic progress. Dear friends, this is a virtuous circle of economic progress that leads to social progress and vice versa. Since the world economic crisis will stop progress temporarily, we have to identify its true cause. Now I will give you my personal opinions. Let's remember that the Federal Reserve intervened in the financial market, reducing the interest rates from 6.5% in December 2000 to 1.75% in December 2001, until reaching 1%, and then keeping them under 1.75% until October 2004. This state intervention distorted the market, making one part that did not qualify to obtain a loan could now pay a mortgage. This is how the economy grew based on an artificially low interest rate. This, according to me, was the first great mistake. Then the supervisors did not pay attention to the new conditions that the Federal Reserve had disposed, where the financial risk increased rapidly in an environment that was not very transparent, that inflated the value of the unmovable. So this was a second great mistake, now recognized by Alan Greenspan himself, that says that the market has to be subject to quality supervision. He said it a little bit late, but he said it. Then, to combat inflation, the Federal Reserve started to increase the interest rates quickly without considering its negative impact in the financial economy. Third great mistake, because it took out of the market those who had just been qualified due to the reduction of the rate. And this made it impossible for them to repay their loans, and this initiated the mortgage crisis. Then the financial rescue of the state constitutes a correction to an imbalance caused by the state intervention in the market. But also, other two actors share this responsibility. The rating organizations, the risk rating organizations that did not have the wisdom to alert about the crisis that was being built, and bankers that separated themselves from their fundamental management system principle, which is prudence, to give free path to the financial ingenious to take advantages from the artificially low rates, forgetting that the same way that they had been reduced, they could go back and increase, as what happened. This shows that the free market works better when it is far away from state interventionism, that we have to limit ourselves to provide quality tools to regulators and supervisors. In other words, we need sound and stable institutions that keep the trust of the people in the financial system. If we're clear on this and we allow and we stop lamenting ourselves and start to act, then we will be able to come out of this crisis with a better institutionality. This crisis is not a matter of establishing if we want more market or less market, or if we want more state or less state. What this is all about is that the system of freedoms is untouchable. The economic models suffer some adjustments. They're never static. As everything in life, they change as well. This is what is happening right now. Some people in America applaud and celebrate because the capitalism is over, but they are very wrong because they live from this capitalism, because they sell their oil to the United States. The challenge, I haven't said names, yes? The challenge to come forth is enormous. We have to review the foundations of the market system model. The model is in the freedom of, in the system of freedoms, for people to start dreaming again, so that people can believe again in freedom and its institutions as the most important tools for progress, and to build our own fate. Allow me to end by saying that nothing is stronger than the capacity of the human being to excel when he is truly free. The United States is an immense market, the most important market in the world, and I have no doubt at all that you will come out of this. I remember that when the crisis started, that there was enormous happiness in many regions. Now they're going to fall, but those that left of the financial and economic problems or the mortgage problems of the U.S. did not recognize that the United States is our main trade partner, our main consumer of everything that the world produces. And therefore, if this market contracts, we will see what we're going through right now. The Organization of Oil Exporting Countries has just decided to reduce in 1.5 million barrels their daily production. And what happened at the stock exchange? Nothing. The price, instead of going up, went down. When oil reached $9, because we have to situate ourselves in time, when I was the candidate, oil was at $20 a barrel. 2 years before, it was $9. Now, I think it's at 62. That's the last thing I heard. I've never been so attentive to the oil prices as now. It's 62. And the oil in Mexico and Venezuela, $10 less. I would like to tell you a story that happened to me at the United Nations, and I have repeated it, and maybe some of you have heard it before. When I arrived to my first participation at the United Nations plenary session, I interviewed myself with the Emir of Qatar. We sat down and we started to talk, and at the end I told him, Your Majesty, tell me, what is, at that time the barrel was at $30, and that was 2004. What is the fair price for oil? Well, he said, with $40 a barrel, we're fine. And it was 30 at that time. The oil reached $147 a barrel. Those games that have been going on at the stock exchange can lead the world to a total collapse that we will not recover from in 10 or 15 years. Every day, I see all the TV programs and I follow the economic analysis, and I'm not very clear yet how profound this problem can be. Nevertheless, since I'm an optimist by nature and a permanent optimist, I believe that this is a good time to correct everything that has to be corrected. When I speak about this, I'm not talking about the fact that the state has to become the owners of the supermarkets and the banks. I don't believe in that. I think a government should not do the things that correspond to the private sector. They must generate the adequate environment. They have to place the rules of the games, but the state has to intervene when it has to. In my country, the state has intervened in financial issues in order to avoid a systemic crisis that at the end terminates by breaking the economic stability that we have built throughout the years. I'm not an economist, but I have the hope that the corrections that are made after this will help everybody. Because why am I talking about the economic issue? Because if I come here at the podium and talk to you about the history of Central America, that I was invited by Mr. Glaser, and I don't talk about the economy, you would tell me, well, you're out of the world daily status. And I came this weekend to promote the registration of the Salvadorans to the TPS that was expanded by President Bush, and I'm going to be here also tomorrow. Tomorrow, the U.S. democracy is going to solidify itself, and you will have a new president regardless of who wins the elections. We're going to work as we have always done. El Salvador has been a partner of the United States and an ally of the United States in many issues. We suffered our own terrorism. And I'm concerned about one thing. The small countries like ours, that don't have any oil, that don't have copper, must cultivate or make of the export culture that we have gained thanks to the free trade agreements that I am so in agreement with. We have to use them to export because we're small markets. Nevertheless, Central America represents 40 million inhabitants. Altogether, 40 million inhabitants that buy, consume, and also can bring a whole region forth. I would like to invite the audience to pay attention to Central America. I see that the United States is very concerned about the world issues like Iraq, where we have our troops as well, as Ambassador Glazer said, or Afghanistan. But in Latin America, serious things are happening, things that the United States is not so concerned of, very serious things. An enormous wave of ideas is growing, ideas that were dead already, that did not even work in the past and that are being repeated now in the present. I think that you have to pay permanent attention to the Central American region, and this is very important because at this moment Central America is much more stable than South America today. But we have to take care of Central America. But all this democratic progress can fall and be lost if the economic issue leads us to our bankruptcy because our economies are small. We have small economies, but we have also the financial backup and reserves that will allow us to intelligently bring our countries out of this. The peace of Central America took a long time. The welfare is still on its path, but we have to take care of it. And this crisis that has generated 100 million poor in the world should be also a motive for concern and worldwide shame. That because of a bad game at the stock exchange, because of the ambition of some, we are damaging million and million of people throughout the world. I think that the United States have a fundamental role to play. This economy has the capacity to react, and I think that you are taking the necessary measures. And the economic orthodox, what would they say when President Bush is announcing that they're going to take control of the banks? Something's wrong. And it's not the model of freedoms. No, something is not well, and we have to supervise it and review it, and not only in the United States, but throughout all the countries. Because what happens to you happens even 5 times worse to us. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
President Saca has agreed to take questions, so we have microphones on both sides of the room. Way in the back, first question. Just 1 second to bring a microphone to you.
President Saca, I know you to be a man who has great respect for investor rights and a great understanding of the importance of private investment to economic development in El Salvador. But Friday evening, CIHET, your electricity regulator, issued Decree 237E 2008, which prevents electricity companies from charging market rates as required under your electricity law. It's a violation of El Salvador's laws to do this, and it's a violation of investor rights in El Salvador. So what I would like to know is, how do you plan to correct this situation and restore investor rights to El Salvador? Thank you.
I absolutely believe that investment is the best way to generate wealth in our countries, but we have regulating institutions. You just mentioned the CIHET. This CIHET is because the government decided to maintain the price of electric energy in order not to avoid social problems, because What is the use of this investor? Because the government is paying. We have absorbed that cost. A great part of the cost of electricity is absorbed by the state. But what good can it be for an investor if in the midst of a financial problem our country starts having some social problems as well? It would be much complicated. Latin America is about to have a social disruption with this economic problem. We have subsidized part of the rate, not for the industrial sector, but for the residential sector. And we are going to, little by little, making some focalization to give cheaper energy to the poorer people. This is part of our poverty combat policies. With the electric institutions, we are negotiating at this moment, and they receive the same money. There's no violation. We have not changed the rules of the game. They are receiving the same money. What we have tried to do is to agree. The state has always responded because this subsidy has started quite a while ago, and we're paying them what they merit. And what are we going to correct that? By paying the subsidy. There's a discussion on how, with what frequency we have to pay the subsidy, and this is what we're trying to negotiate. As the head of state, I'm in the obligation of avoiding a social disruption in my country, and to avoid people to come out in the streets and demonstrate and burn these electric companies because they will not be able to pay their electric bills. And we have respected them. We have never expropriated any company, and it's not even crossing my mind, the mind of President Saca, to expropriate anything or to intervene any of these companies like what has happened in several countries throughout the region. We believe in the market. We are in constant meetings with the distributors, and the investor is going to make a coal plant in the new Cutuco port at La Unión.
Yes, sir.
My name is Father Andrew Small. I'm with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Pido perdón, se me explicó en inglés para no equivocarme con la explicación. Pero,
Soy arzobispo. Presidente Saca, usted sabe muy bien acerca de la señal de solidaridad del compacto
and Salvador for $461 million. In that compact, there is an area of alternative agricultural development in the same place that Pacific Rim Mining is keen to do some gold mining. Talking a little bit about that particular case, which is causing unrest, certainly civic unrest in Salvador. How does one balance the need to build prosperity and peace, particularly around the question of natural resources? You say there's no copper, there's no oil, there are other resources. In Honduras, in Guatemala, claro que sí. There are other resources that the world will need and will seek. How do you balance this with the priority that those resources translate into development for the people who need it most?
Just one question to the Archbishop. Do you agree with mining?
No,
your personal opinion about mining, here or in any place? It depends on the circumstances.
Muy bien.
Very good.
Bueno, mire, yo les quiero
Well,
contar
I
un
want to
poco
tell you a little bit about, well, today we are opening offices of the Millennium Account in great part of the northern part of the country. El Salvador qualified as a middle-income country, and we were able to have the support of the U.S. government of almost $500 million that will allow us to build a highway, a 300-kilometer highway that will join El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. This means that the new port of La Unión in the Pacific in the Pacific Ocean will be able to connect with Honduras through a dry canal, a highway, and also with the other port of Guatemala through this northern longitudinal highway. The building of this highway in that area is going to change the lives of these people, and that includes not only Monsignor, it does not only include the highway, but the development of the agricultural and rural electrification and great investments in basic services, potable water, and others. In reality, it is a complete program. It's going to last 5 years to build it up, and we have started it already. And there is a person that is very capable at the front of this project that has the support of the Millennium Challenge account as well as of the government of El Salvador. In one of those northern areas, we have mines. There are some mines in Chalatenango, and there are some other mines in San Isidro Cabañas, El Dorado. They say, the experts say, that there is quite a lot of gold that we're not even aware of. We asked the Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources to carry out a study, 2 studies. One study of how much gold we really have, and we're working on it, and a study basically on the environmental impact. When this is over, we will make a decision. We have an investor who was granted a permit for exploitation, but still need exploration, but he is still waiting for his exploitation permit, which is the next step, but he has to comply with these 2 requirements. This is a complicated issue, and I asked you about this because the Salvadoran Church opposes the mining because it says that cyanide that is used can affect the water sources in the sector. That is basically their discussion. But it's a matter of opinions and realities. It is not the same to mine in Nevada, where you have enormous territorial extensions, than to mine in a small country. But I share with you the fact that if you have natural resources that God gave us, we have to see how we can exploit them. But I have to respect the prior steps of these 2 studies. And this is what I told our investor. We're not violent. What's more, an exploration permit does not oblige us to give him an exploitation permit. Nevertheless, we believe that if this is fulfilled, we will analyze through the Ministry of Economy all these issues. But the experts say that we do have an enormous amount of gold. And gold is going up or down? Gold has been quite at a good price, all the commodities.
Cindy Arnson from the Woodrow Wilson Center. Voy a tratar de hablar en español, si está bien. La semana pasada
Last week we had a forum here on the impact of the Central American economies in the prices of energy and food. We also had an official of the IDB that showed us how much the remittances are falling for all Central America, but particularly for El Salvador. Although there's that they're growing very little. So my question has to do with the social impact for El Salvador if the problems in the economy of the United States continues for 2-3 years, what will be the impact on El Salvador? The projection of the remittance growth was at 11%. And we're going to grow 6% almost. This means that El Salvador is going to receive $3,600 million in remittances approximately. This is what we can control through our banking system and through the houses that send remittances and some other sources that we cannot control. And like those that arrive in El Salvador with their money in their pockets. I think that El Salvador is receiving almost $4 billion in remittances. It will affect us, especially if the Salvadorans here in the United States work in services and in the construction sectors. Especially the construction sector is an area that has been severely affected throughout the region. And of course, that will affect our remittances. I think that what the governments of Central America must do, and this is what we resolved in the summit in San Salvador, is to prepare ourselves to inject liquidity to our systems. We think that this week we're going to be able to get a loan from the World Bank and the IDB for almost $1 billion that will serve to invest in social issues very strongly. We're going to inject $3 million to our economy, and we're going to reserve $650 for the due date of the Eurobonds, because El Salvador is a solvent country. We have paid all our debts, and with all our problems, we have been able to maintain a positive risk rating. I hope that this agreement that we have reached with all the opposition will have the favorable agreement in the afternoon, especially because the financing sources are scarce. Banks are receiving the requests from many countries to inject capital to their own economies. In the case of El Salvador, I believe that besides the remittances that could be impacted, but that will depend on how the U.S. economy goes, governments have to do their own work. We have to prepare ourselves. We have to have the solvency to face any economic crisis. I can tell you that since the country is dollarized, in some way, dollarization forced the government to be very responsible in their fiscal management. We don't have a policy to produce our own bills and to inject them irresponsibly into our economy. We are forced to manage it very, very soundly, and our national budget is totally financed by the taxes paid by Salvadorans. We don't need loans in the last 3 years, at least, to keep our national budget.
Anybody else? No? Well, good. Thank you all very much for coming today. Thank you, President Saca.